Meghan is acting as an absolute nightmare for him right now. The royal world has been rocked by a massive media bombshell after an ex-British reporter claims he has concrete verification of a hidden romance between Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew that goes back over 20 years. In just a few hours, short snippets of this shocking interview went totally viral, sparking a level of online frenzy that hasn't been seen since the peak of the Epstein trial. Down in London, King Charles is reportedly pacing his floors in total panic. A highly classified, urgent meeting was apparently held under maximum security to dissect what happened back in 2001. Rumors are swirling about a young, ambitious woman showing up at high-end royal gatherings, followed by months of intense courtship filled with private estate tours, late-night city drives, and highly coordinated secret meetings across the ocean. Meghan fought back immediately. Her top-tier lawyers stepped in, firing off aggressive cease-and-desist notices and promising massive legal warfare. But instead of quieting down the public, this aggressive countermove only made people more curious. Is King Charles desperately trying to hide a massive cover-up that could bring down the House of Windsor? And is Meghan genuinely defending her innocence, or is she trying to bury a dark chapter from her Hollywood past? In his private office at Buckingham Palace, smelling of old wood and hot tea, King Charles sat totally frozen. His weathered hands, with joints showing the heavy toll of age and immense royal stress, rested flat on his leather desk. It seemed like fate refused to give him a break, constantly fracturing his family from within. His eyes were glued to a screen where a digital video played over and over again. It featured the bold claims of a blacklisted former royal writer, a journalist banned by the palace since the early 2000s for digging way too deep into the private lives of then Prince Charles and Princess Diana. The sudden allegation of undeniable proof linking Meghan Markle to Prince Andrew more than 2 decades ago hit the exhausted king like an electric shock. Charles closed his eyes, letting his mind travel back to 2001. Back then, Andrew was still the late Queen's favorite son, riding high on international tours, while Meghan Markle was just a struggling Hollywood actress trying to make it in LA, a total stranger to the British aristocracy. If their paths had truly crossed back then, it would mean total destruction for the monarchy, especially since Andrew had already been stripped of his royal duties due to the Epstein scandal. The king didn't slam the desk or scream. The rage of a man who had survived everything from the Camilla tape leak to Diana's passing showed up as a terrifying, icy silence. He slowly pushed the tablet away like it was poison, even though he knew exactly how much destructive power it held over his family. He picked up the secure phone to call his chief of staff. His voice was incredibly quiet, but laced with iron, ordering immediate digital sweep to track down every single website spreading the reporter's video. Charles knew that without rapid containment, this scandal would not only ruin whatever was left of Andrew's name, but it would also destroy the abused outsiders narrative that Harry and his wife had built so perfectly across the United States. Halfway across the globe from Great Britain, inside her massive and heavily guarded Montecito estate, Meghan stood by a giant glass wall looking out over her sun-drenched California lawn. Since her massive royal wedding in 2018 and their dramatic exit from royal life in 2020, she had built a perfect public persona, a modern, strong woman refusing to bow down to outdated traditions. But as she looked at the breaking news alerts sent over by her personal assistant from the British gossip sites, her lips formed a hard line, a small, nervous habit that always happened when she felt the pressure of the media closing in. A deep silence filled the Sussex home. Meghan didn't immediately call her PR firm or post a denial on Instagram, which was usually her go-to move against fake news. She just stood there, perfectly still, watching the morning sun hit the trees, her mind working at 1,000,000 miles an hour to look at the situation from every angle. She knew better than anyone that in today's media world, staying quiet could be a brilliant chess move or a deadly trap. Blurred memories from her early 20s started playing in her head like an old movie reel. She remembered being a deeply driven young woman crashing elite parties to secure her big break. She knew she had to act, but the timing wasn't right. Not until her enemies showed their final hand. The total radio silence from the Sussexes in America, matched with Buckingham Palace's deep caution in London, created a massive information void. Internet forums exploded with millions of users sharing their craziest theories. Fake rumors, pushed to the top by social media algorithms, quickly started looking like absolute facts to the general public. Back in London, King Charles stood up and walked over to the window looking down at the palace courtyard, watching the changing of the guard. He muttered a few words to himself, his voice disappearing into the massive room, but carrying an absolute, unyielding resolve. He was no longer a soft father desperate to make up with Harry. He was a reigning king dealing with the ultimate task of keeping the monarchy alive. His eyes narrowed into the empty space. I must discover the real truth before the public writes it for me. Deep inside the quiet hallways of Buckingham Palace, a top-secret investigation started moving like a perfectly greased machine. Under the king's direct orders, his most trusted investigator, a man with freezing blue eyes who knew how to vanish into the shadows, began tracking the disgraced reporter's history. Old paper records and digital files detailing Prince Andrew's inner circle in the early 2000s were pulled out and checked one by one. The initial data brought a brief sense of comfort. Every single claim made by the journalists seemed to be built entirely on old rumors, random gossip from chaotic parties, and a total lack of any real physical evidence that could ever stand up in a court of law. But just as palace officials began to breathe a sigh of relief, internet algorithms beat them to the punch by a single devastating moment. A specific photo leaked out of nowhere, spreading with an uncontrollable wildfire on X and Instagram. It was a grainy, low-res picture with that distinct yellow tint from early digital cameras. The image showed the deck of a hyper-luxury yacht, with Mediterranean sunlight beating down so hard it almost blinded the viewer. Right in the middle stood a young woman with long, dark hair, a giant smile, and eyes full of confidence. Her face looked so eerily identical to Meghan Markle that it was genuinely terrifying. She was standing incredibly close to Prince Andrew, whose hand was resting casually on her waist in a highly intimate way. Their vibe went way beyond casual small talk. It captured the wild, unregulated atmosphere of billionaire parties, where traditional morals are left at the dock. Public opinion changed in a single second. What had been laughed off as the lies of a washed-up journalist suddenly had the proof everyone wanted. The tabloids attacked with absolute brutality. Facial recognition experts were brought onto live TV to tear apart every single detail, from cheekbone structure and nose shapes down to a tiny mole on the woman's face. The speculation was no longer just a theory. It had turned into a brutal public execution of her character. Meghan's loyal fan base tried to fight back, pointing out clear signs of digital editing, but their arguments were instantly drowned out by a tidal wave of hate and celebration from her critics. "They're definitely hiding something" became the consensus, destroying whatever trust remained. Over in California, the mood inside the Montecito mansion went from quiet contemplation to an incredibly thick, razor-sharp tension. Meghan sat completely alone in her private office space, the cold blue light of her laptop screen reflecting off a face drained of color by pure anger and a sudden hit of shock. She stared directly at the photo frozen on her monitor, her fingers gripping the edge of her wooden desk so hard her skin turned white. The distinct feeling of being trapped activated her ultimate survival instincts. She didn't cry, nor did she break down in panic. Instead, her eyes burned with a freezing, calculated determination. She knew this was no ordinary internet rumor. This was a direct attack on her dignity and the multi-million-dollar corporate brand she had spent years building. Each rhythmic tap of her fingers against the desk meant a decision had been made. She picked up her phone, her mouth fixed in a tight, stubborn line. Without wasting a single word, she called the most aggressive law firms in London and New York. The move was fast, calculated, and decisive, like moving a crucial piece in a chess match where life itself was on the line. While digital forensic specialists continued to argue over whether the picture showed signs of AI generation or advanced Photoshop edits, the actual truth mattered far less than the massive weight of public doubt. Deep down, Meghan recognized she was dealing with the most calculated character assassination attempt of her entire life, a scenario where her past, whether real or completely made up, was being used to destroy her present. Meghan Markle's legal army went to work with the speed of soldiers entering a war zone. Inside her California headquarters, the continuous thumping of keyboards sounded like battle drums. What had started as initial shock transformed into an intense, freezing energy. A massive wave of aggressive cease and desist warnings bearing the logos of elite law firms, charging thousands of dollars an hour, flooded the world's biggest media outlets and viral social media accounts. She personally directed the writing and production of her official video statement, choosing the exact camera angles and soft lighting to project total, unshakable composure. In the short clip, Meghan never wavered. Her eyes locked directly into the camera lens, delivering a firm statement that the yacht photo was entirely a product of malicious digital manipulation. She classified it as a highly coordinated smear campaign designed to destroy everything she stood for. Harry stood right beside his wife at a minor charity function held just days later. Even though he forced a smile for the gathered photographers, his body language completely exposed his inner anxiety. His fingers continuously messed with the bottom of his jacket. His eyes shifted nervously around the room, as if he were scanning the press pack for hidden threats. Deep lines of sheer exhaustion and stress were carved into his face. He stood right next to Meghan, protecting her with a fiercely protective instinct. Yet, beneath that brave face, doubt was beginning to set in. He knew all too well how the British media could attack his loved ones, but hearing the name of Prince Andrew again, his uncle who was already completely ruined by scandal, triggered a strange, deeply uncomfortable feeling. He publicly insisted his family was being targeted by a vicious media machine, but his voice lacked the passionate energy it used to have. The Sussexes' aggressive legal pushback didn't put out the fire. Instead, it split the world even further. One side fully believed Meghan's explanation, seeing her as the ultimate symbol of a woman being hunted by an old-fashioned system. The other half started repeating the classic phrase, "Where there's smoke, there's fire." Doubt began creeping into even the most traditional corners of Buckingham Palace. King Charles, despite desperately wanting to trust and safeguard his youngest son, maintained a very careful distance. He offered absolutely no public statements of support, choosing an official silence while watching the drama unfold from a distance, all while quietly telling his personal security team to push forward with their private investigation. The shocking twist occurred when a British tabloid, leveraging its hyper-aggressive reporting instincts, sent journalists to dig through old commercial modeling books from the early 2000s. After days of filtering through Canadian model headshots from 20 years ago, they finally hit the jackpot. The woman captured in the viral yacht photo was not Meghan Markle. She was almost certainly a commercial Canadian model whose face and smile looked incredibly identical to Meghan's. She had participated in a promotional marketing campaign for a high-end yacht company around the exact same time Andrew attended the event. The retraction notice was put out immediately, hitting the furious internet crowd like a bucket of freezing water. The Sussex team in California took a quick breath of relief with a massive legal and media win firmly secured. However, that peace didn't last long. Back in London, King Charles held the morning edition of the paper, his face showing absolutely no signs of relief. He stood completely still next to his desk, staring out at the quiet palace courtyard. Deep down, a persistent, uncomfortable feeling remained incredibly clear. The photograph might have been proven fake and the model's actual identity confirmed, but the rumors of a secret relationship still lingered like an uninvited ghost. Charles slowly folded up the paper, his voice dropping to a whisper in the quiet room. The photograph might be an absolute fake,
But what about the rest of the allegations? The question wasn't just aimed at Andrew, it carried a tragic undertone of deep doubt directed at his daughter-in-law living across the world. The quiet winter dusk of London filtered through the large, narrow windows of a secluded country home on the city's edge where King Charles had decided to take a massive gamble. He sat in a classic velvet chair, his hands locked tightly together to hide the growing anxiety beneath his royal posture. Sitting opposite him was the disgraced former reporter, the exact man who had started this entire nightmare. The arrogant attitude he displayed on television was completely gone. Now he sat hunched forward, his eyes darting around with defensive caution, though he couldn't completely mask the arrogant joy of being granted a face-to-face meeting with the King of England in a locked room. The quietness inside the space was so heavy that the popping logs in the fireplace sounded like firecrackers. King Charles refused to speak first. He used silence and his immense royal status like a pressure cooker, forcing the journalist to crack. The reporter cleared his craft, then slowly began walking his memory back 20 years. According to his account, the meeting didn't happen on a sun-drenched boat like that fake photo showed, but rather at a highly sophisticated, private dinner party inside a secure villa on the outskirts of London, where all royal rules were left outside the locked gates. He detailed a young woman whose face and expressions looked shockingly similar to Meghan. He stopped just short of making an absolute confirmation, though the underlying message was clear that it was almost certainly her. She had reportedly appeared like a mysterious figure moving among incredibly powerful men, with Prince Andrew being a central player. What caused Charles's chest to tighten were not stories of wild behavior, but rather the claim of a highly structured operation. The journalist explained how this young woman had been pursued in highly unusual ways. Exclusive early morning tours of royal properties before they opened to the public, late-night car rides through London in vehicles with heavily blacked-out windows, and precisely timed secret encounters that left absolutely no footprint on any official royal logbook. Charles listened, keeping his face as emotionless as stone, yet deep down, a painful seed of doubt took root. He desperately hunted for a mistake, a single contradiction that would let him throw out the entire story. But the timeline fit way too perfectly with Meghan's brief travels to Europe to find acting work for him to completely ignore it. Every little habit, every quirk and movement the reporter described formed a picture that felt incredibly familiar. The king's internal torment peaked when the journalist confessed a brutal truth. He didn't have any paperwork, no legal contracts, not even a single clear photo. The entire claim relied on personal memories and a collection of scattered stories. The man looked directly into Charles's eyes with a look of pure defiance, as if to say he knew he possessed a weapon with absolutely no cure. Permanent, unprovable suspicion.
The secret meeting wrapped up just as total darkness covered the estate. King Charles stepped out into the hallway, his posture looking heavier than it had ever had before. Every single footstep on the old wooden floor sounded cold and lonely. He felt absolutely no relief that there was a lack of hard evidence. On the contrary, he was terrified by the horrific power of secrets that could never be validated. As he settled into the back seat of his waiting vehicle, he turned to his trusted advisor, his voice dripping with pure exhaustion. He recognized that in the universe of royalty and mass media, an unprovable truth was infinitely more dangerous than an outright fabrication. It acted like a hidden crack beneath a building's foundation, completely invisible, yet entirely capable of bringing the whole structure down in a single second. The king stared out the window, watching the reflection of his own tired, helpless face as old scandals returned, ready to tear apart the fragile peace of his family. The soft yellow lamplight in the Montecito office space did very little to cut through the freezing chill that settled over Harry after his long phone conversation with London. He sank deep into his leather seat, his phone still gripped so intensely in his fist that his knuckles turned completely white.
His dad's voice, quiet, tired, yet incredibly serious, still rang in his ears, passing along the exact details of that secret meeting with the former journalist. It wasn't a royal command, nor was it a direct accusation. It was a warning from a father trying his best to stop his son from being drowned by a raging storm. Harry felt a total psychological collapse happening inside his mind. He had always relied on his gut feelings and the intense protective instinct he held for Meghan, but the specific details of a calculated courtship from 20 years ago now clicked together with terrifying accuracy. He closed his eyes tight, trying to push away the mental images, a young Meghan walking through dark, silent palaces late at night, or riding in the back of the blacked-out cars his father had just detailed. The timing and locations fit together like sharp puzzle pieces, not quite revealing the whole picture yet, but sharp enough to slice through the fragile piece they had fought so hard to keep. He stood up and started walking aimlessly around the dark office, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. Questions that had always been completely forbidden in their relationship were now growing like weeds. He flashed back to the stories Meghan had shared about her tough but ambitious years traveling through Europe, details he had once viewed as proof of her work ethic. Now, those same stories carried a deeply confusing, darker shadow. Harry felt like a man standing on a melting piece of ice in the middle of a vast ocean, watching deep cracks spread out beneath his feet with absolutely no way to halt them. In a moment of pure panic, he knocked several files off his desk. The dry sound of papers hitting the floor only worsened the absolute horror twisting in his gut. While Harry fell deeper into despair, Meghan opted for a response of freezing silence. She stood out in the hallway, her long shadow falling across the floor under the dim light, quietly observing her husband's emotional breakdown through a cracked door. She didn't walk in to comfort him, nor did she offer any clarity regarding the newly exposed details. Her facial expression remained completely neutral, but her eyes were incredibly deep and impossible to read. Her choice to stay silent wasn't a confession of guilt, yet it lacked the intense, righteous anger you would expect from someone facing total lies, and that missing piece only made the ache of doubt burn deeper inside Harry's chest. Outside their walls, the entire world waited anxiously. Global media outlets split completely into two distinct sides. One side continuously dug up weird coincidences from Meghan's early life to support the theories of an Andrew connection, while the other protected her fiercely against attacks based on nothing but old memories without physical proof. The post-royal identity the Sussexes had built so carefully, centered entirely on truth and empathy, was shaking to its foundation. Corporate partners became incredibly nervous. Major business opportunities began drying up, replaced by cold, distant observation. That night, Harry never went to sleep. He sat completely isolated in their massive living room, staring blankly into the dark. Pale moonlight washed over his tired face, catching the shocked look of a man coming to terms with the idea that the person he loved most might be carrying a past he knew nothing about. Thousands of miles away in Great Britain, King Charles stood by the window looking over the palace's dark winter gardens. His face looked incredibly firm, his usual soft attitude completely gone, replaced by the unyielding focus of a protector of the British crown. He spoke softly to the close advisor standing right behind him, his words filled with deep sadness and absolute focus. If hard proof ever comes to light, the royal family will show absolutely no mercy. The warning lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence, proving that the Sussexes' fragile life might be nothing more than a beautiful dream on the edge of a total collapse. The massive media storm, after ripping through their lives and leaving deep, permanent scars, finally started to fade according to the brutal habits of the modern digital world. The arrival of newer, more shocking viral news took over the internet. Minor corrections regarding the fake yacht photo began popping up on mainstream news platforms, but they never received anywhere near the massive traffic of the initial scandalous claims. The public shifted its attention to the next big internet drama, leaving behind a total mess of broken trust and damaged images. Meghan Markle started making public appearances again with extreme care. At charity events and digital panels, she deliberately selected outfits featuring very quiet, dark tones, keeping her makeup incredibly minimal to project the calm dignity of a woman who had survived a massive storm. Every single movement, from the way she placed her hand over her chest to the quiet tilt of her head while listening to others, was perfectly designed to win back the love of her followers. Yet deep within her eyes, the bright, hyper-focused look she used to possess had faded, replaced by a highly defensive guard. She walked as if the floor beneath her feet was no longer solid ground, but rather incredibly thin ice that could split open at any single moment. Harry, on the other hand, appeared to be an entirely different person. He attempted to project the image of a stable, jovial family man whenever cameras were around, but the performance looked completely fake and fragile. In shared photos, his fingers no longer held his wife's hand with absolute confidence. Instead, he offered hesitant, stiff touches that lacked any real warmth. He spent way more time isolated in his personal study, throwing himself into extreme sports as a quick strategy to run away from his unanswered thoughts. His obsession with the weird timing coincidences his father had warned him about never went away. It simply buried itself deeper into his mind, burning quietly like coals that never go out, completely blocking his path back to real happiness next to the woman he had once completely adored. Over in London, the day-to-day routine of Buckingham Palace seemed to return to normal. However, the mood inside carried a far heavier, sadder tone. King Charles III routinely spent his late afternoons walking completely alone through the palace's dark winter gardens, where bare tree branches reached up towards a dark gray sky like thin, skeletal fingers. He recognized that even without any new physical evidence, this digital war had permanently changed the game. Public confidence in the global Sussex brand had been shaken right down to its core, and the dark cloud of a scandalous past, whether real or completely fabricated, had been permanently burned into the public mind. The king stood completely still in front of an old stone statue, his eyes locked on the far horizon where the sun was setting. He knew that in this internet era, actual truth was no longer the only thing that mattered. What mattered, infinitely more, was public perception and the feelings of the crowd. A perfectly timed, well-placed rumor could cause far more damage than 1,000 official legal charges. The past, no matter how deeply you try to bury it, will always discover a tiny crack to leak through, supercharged by new technology and human nosiness. After finishing the story, in your opinion, is Meghan's silence throughout the investigation a clever psychological tactic to protect herself? Or is it a silent admission of a past she doesn't want to confront? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen.